This is Greg Troutline with Maritime Reporter TV, and we're very pleased to be joined again by Peter Sand, the Chief Analyst of Xeneta, to discuss the ever-changing and the always interesting container shipping sector. So why don't we start with the Far East to the U.S. West Coast trade. You know, there's obviously many dynamics that are working together here, particularly with the strained relations between the U.S. and China. Can you discuss the forces at work and how they're impacting the container trade? As I specifically read recently in the Financial Times that the U.S. has overtaken China as the market for South Korean goods.
Never a dull day in container shipping and supply chains, Greg. Great to be back. And what you allude to here is one of many factors to watch out for when seeking to make your supply chains more resilient as a shipper. And without doubt, China plus one strategy is one of the many strategies that global and American shippers do deploy to a larger and larger extent every day. On 29 June, Xeneta published our monthly long-term rate report. It's you can say a bellwether for what shippers are paying the carriers and the freight forwarders in the market right now for shipments across the globe. And this one is no different than what we have seen for a number of months now, declining long-term rates. And one of the factors that caught my eye when compiling the numbers and writing up the report only a few hours ago was actually the fact that Korean exports to US West Coast defies the main trend of all other origins going into the North American continent, US East Coast or US West Coast, because the rates falling faster into US East Coast than US West Coast. It has been a trend during the labor negotiations that shippers have shied away from the US West Coast for obvious reasons, but this one is standing out. So my main point making here is that there is always exceptions to the general rule. You really need to monitor and analyze your market all the time. You need to stay on top of your game, because if you have the opportunity to change your corridors, to change your supply chains, there's not only resilience to be found in here, there, and everywhere, but there's also money to be saved if you can pick and choose between various corridors. So watch this space. The report is out tomorrow. Whether it's geo-politics, whether it's more resilient supply chains, at the end of the day, freight rates is telling you the true story. So there you have it, Greg.
Peter, for the moment, let's keep our eyes on the Far East. As an interesting good news story is the rapid rise in the spot market from the Far East to the South American East Coast trade. What's happening there, and are long-term rates following suit?
It's a really interesting trade because in many ways, it isn't the most beaten track, but it is a trade that often follow its own ways. We have general trends on main hauls like the Transpac from Far East into US West Coast, from Far East into North Europe, but then Far East into South America East Coast is definitely a character in its own making. For the most recent 3 months, if you use Xeneta data, you can see that spot rates are up by 49%. And in the same period of time, exactly long-term rates are down by 49%. So always some drama in the making here, but the real trick is that that demand on this corridor is up by no less than 20% year on year. So spot rates on the move, getting higher. Long-term rates, they have been fairly flat in the most recent couple of months, but trust me on this one, when spot rates tend to go higher every day, well, carriers definitely also seek to push up the rates offered on long-term contracts. So next time we speak, it may not be the fact that they are going in exactly the opposite direction with exactly the same growth rate, but it is definitely a trade to watch out for, as not many trades are growing by 20% on over a year basis, but Far East to US East Coast is one of them. Far East to Mediterranean, you might check that up on Xeneta's blog post, because we also focus on the growth into to the Mediterranean. So there are blue skies for shippers and carriers out there, well, you pay higher rates when there's demand pushing up and capacity is not deployed at the same extent. So watch that trade as it constantly develops, and it's one of the most volatile that we see around on the main hauls.
It would be remiss not to dig into what's happening in the Panama Canal. Obviously, low water issues have hampered trade for some time now. From your perspective, is the situation starting to ease?
Yes and no. There's more rain, not only coming, but also during this week. That made the Panama Canal authorities postpone the tighter draft restrictions that they had teed up to come in to force earlier this week. They did not set a new date, so that's positive. You can say it's moving sideways because the draft restrictions are still intact at 44 feet. Normally, they sit at 50 feet. So obviously there is limitations to the amount of cargo that can transit the corridor and this critical maritime choke point. We see the authorities also limiting the number of daily transits as one measure to save water used during the transits. So is this all something we should no longer worry about? Absolutely not. But I think it's fair to say that shippers and carriers have found ways around it. Xeneta data proves that point of being fairly flat for a key trade lane transiting the Panama Canal, that one from Far East into US East Coast. So even though some carriers have asked for surcharges, they have failed fairly miserable in pushing through with those, as shippers have opted for alternative services, going through the canal in Suez, for instance, as an alternative route to the one that is currently hit by a little bit of drought. A little bit of drought. Well, it's a significant change, I must say, but the impact so far on supply chains, mostly longer transit times. We see the northbound transits are now approximately 10 to 14 days of delays. So if you have goods that is on water right now, sailing for the Panama Canal, you should expect it to arrive late. So again, it is a developing story, one that is likely to become worse next year, but still, it's by no means done deal for 2023. So we'll watch that space too, Greg.